Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. So much to talk about this week. We have the kangaroo court proceeding up in New York that's gotten even worse, believe it or not, with the Stormy Daniels testimony that was such an abuse. I just can't believe we're in the situation we're in with that show trial up there. I'll get into the details there. Massive new lawsuit by Judicial Watch in California to clean up the rolls. You'll want to be here for that. On top of that, we have new evidence of more abuse against Trump, including evidence tampering and what could be missing classified information by the same gang that's trying to jail Trump over the handling of classified information, including related to that even, we've got new interesting voicemail detailing the collusion, at least in part, between the FBI and the Secret Service in terms of the targeting of Trump. Speaking of the targeting of Trump, we have even more there, with Fani Willis being in default on a case related to the collusion targeting Trump with the Biden gang and the Pelosi Congress. So much to talk about, so little time. Actually, we have as much time as I want. I guess the update goes as long as I can keep on talking. But I can only talk for so long, folks. But as we begin, let's go back up to New York City. We have just completed the fourth week, as I call it, of America held hostage, where President Trump is a political hostage in the courtroom of a Democratic donor, politician, Judge Merchan, who has kept him there, shackled him, gagged him, not literally shackled him, but effectively has shackled him to the courtroom up there. The beginning of the week began with another finding by the court that Trump violated his anti-constitutional, anti-First Amendment, election-interfering gag order. He fined him again and again reiterated that he could send him to jail if he keeps on defending his God-given rights under the First Amendment. As I described it on Twitter, Judge Merchan, conflicted Biden donor and Democratic Party politician, again fines and threatens to jail Trump for exercising his God-given First Amendment rights. Never before in American history has a presidential candidate like Trump, former president, been prohibited from defending himself and his campaign prohibited from speaking about a matter of public import. It's astonishing. And the courts in New York have been compromised and corrupted. And how do I know that? The proof is in the pudding. And the pudding is the awful anti-constitutional gag on Trump's activities and speech during this election interfering trial. And so after that added abuse, because the abuse continues, the government or the prosecutors up in New York, who are also, which is also run by a Democrat appointed, a Democrat politician, not appointed, an actual Democrat politician, Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg, started with more abuse by bringing in Stormy Daniels. Now, those of you who haven't been following along, Stormy Daniels, at least her name's at the center of this because Bragg is alleging that Trump paid money to Cohen, who had paid money to Stormy Daniels to give her some consideration for a confidentiality agreement related to any interaction or anything else she had with President Trump. And the government and Bragg is saying, well, that should have been reported as a campaign contribution, and it was misreported as a legal expense. And they're not quite clear as to what law that they violated in terms of what it should have been reported on. So we've got the president, a former president of the United States, and likely, possibly, depending on how you interpret the polls, a future president of the United States, being hauled into court in the middle of the presidential campaign on allegations he committed a crime they won't tell him the details of. The only specific allegation that you can hang your hat on is that the transaction data for the payments to Michael Cohen by Trump's people and Trump were mislabeled internally. And that falls apart because they were labeled as legal expenses, and it's clear it was a legal expense. So did Stormy Daniels know anything about this other than the fact that she was willing to testify to a sexual tryst with Trump? No. So her testimony, to the degree it was needed at all, could have been over in 3 minutes. Instead, and the court let them do this, they brought her in, and the Democrats elicited testimony from her that was graphic, unnecessary, inflammatory, and should have resulted in a mistrial for Mr. Trump. And instead, Merchant, as I say, and I called it, this is how I called it, an evil and malicious attack, or in this case, actions by the Democratic politicians. So this was a twofer. The president, the prosecutor, and the judge were both involved in the show trial. And Trump called for a mistrial after this craziness. And the judge, believe it or not, of course, because he isn't going to take responsibility. He said, well, you should have objected. I could have upheld some of the objections. And he admitted some of the testimony shouldn't have come in. And he blamed the Trump legal team for not raising objections. But the fact is, as she was to testify, they asked that that type of testimony be prohibited. And he said no. And then he yells at them for not raising objections subsequently. What a hack. It was terrible. It was terrible. And what a mockery it makes of the rule of law in New York. What a mockery it makes of our nation across the world. That that the former president and leading candidate is being harassed and smeared in this way. And as this is happening, you have these headlines about Stormy Daniels' testimony across the nation, and Trump is literally prohibited by pain of jail from speaking out about it. I've never seen anything like it. I think I had a tweet up that I think even President Trump tweeted out, or at least retruthed out on Truth Social. What was the tweet I put up there? Judge Merchant is out of control in New York. His political rulings against Trump are assaults on fairness, logic, and the rule of law. Truly, truly shameful. And Trump agrees. And he's right to agree, because I'm right. Obviously. It's shameful. And what's interesting is, I was thinking about this shortly before I came on. Now, maybe it's because I don't traipse in the crazy swampland of the left media the way others do. But forget me, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I don't think I've even heard much in the way of leftist defense of what's going on in New York. There's kind of this silence. They're not promoting it the way they would in other circumstances. So I think even the left realizes, oh, this is a bridge too far. And others have noted that he may have a case for a mistrial depending on how this trial turns out. Well, the problem with that is that could happen in 2 years. I mean, he could be convicted by what is likely to be almost an overwhelmingly Democratic jury. It's in New York City. I mean, that's the whole purpose of trying to bring him in, because they thought whatever they would tell the jury doesn't matter. The jury's going to convict him because it's anti-Trump. And so the question I have, and I don't know the answer to it because I haven't seen much reporting on it, and I've been trying to track what's been going on in the courtroom, but there hasn't been much reporting on the jury's reaction to this testimony. I wonder how the jury reacted to Stormy Daniels' nastiness, her being caught in displays of outrageous bias against Trump. I mean, it's her right? But does it make her a more credible witness? And of course, she's not a witness to anything other than her alleged interaction with Trump. And that's not the issue. Now, the government says, well, of course it's the issue, because if they had a relationship, it goes to his motivation. Well, that could have been, they could have gotten evidence in that wasn't so disruptive and out of line in terms of smearing Trump. And of course, the goal is, and maybe they think they're losing, so it doesn't matter. They're just going to go and try to take Trump out through smears and innuendo. And if it's a friendly jury, it doesn't matter what they do because they're not held to any legal standards. So, you know, a sensible jury would look at this and say, there's no there there. Again, and I'm trying to be objective here. It's, you know, I'm looking for information that would make me think, oh, I wonder if that jury, you know, that's the crime, or that's the evidence of the crime that might be persuasive to a jury. I haven't seen it. It hasn't been presented. The government said they have 2 more witnesses, including Michael Cohen, who's got issues of his own, the former lawyer for the president. So that's where we stand on the abuse of Trump, and nothing's been done about it. Republicans have been AWOL in defending Trump. I don't know if you saw the news this week, but Speaker Johnson survived a challenge to his speakership thanks to Democrats. And he told Politico he was not planning to do anything to curtail the abuses by Jack Smith. Nothing in appropriations bills. Of course, I've been asking and highlighting that opportunity for the last half year or so, and it's no surprise he's reiterated that he's not going to do anything. Prior to now, he's kind of just pretended, Speaker Johnson has, that, well, he doesn't have the votes. Now it looks like he's literally opposed to doing it on principle. He doesn't want to restrict Jack Smith. So this is a terrible abuse, what's happening. And on the other hand, the Stormy Daniels trial, for a disinterested observer, or excuse me, the testimony, I guess the left wants it to be the Stormy Daniels trial. It's about how records were listed in a ledger 6 years ago. It may backfire. I mean, is it so craven and despicable and shameful that a juror says, this is gross. I know what's going on here. I don't like Trump, but I'm not going to play this game. And you get a hung jury. I don't think he's going to get acquitted. I just don't think he's going to get acquitted. But I could be wrong. So 2 more witnesses, and then President Trump puts on his defense. If he so chooses, he may not put on a defense. Maybe he can say, there's no evidence here. There's nothing to defend against. They haven't proven their case. That's what sometimes defenses do, criminal defendants do, is that they just rest after the government puts on their case because their position is they haven't made the case. And as of now, they haven't made the case. It's been 4 weeks of a kangaroo court with zero evidence of criminal activity by Trump. The only evidence I could see, so what I said about Stormy Daniels, allowing her to testify to the irrelevant but salacious details of her alleged encounter with Trump, because she needed to establish her credibility. That was Merchant's excuse for allowing all that sex talk in. Calling this a kangaroo court, well, that's a pretty good line. I forgot I said that. It's true. It's an insult to kangaroos. Although I understand in Australia, kangaroos aren't as well liked as we presume. They're more seen as pests than those of us looking at it from afar. But it is a kangaroo court. It's a show trial. Every negative thing you could say about this trial, you could fairly say. And it probably wouldn't be enough. So however upsetting it was to see this abuse of Trump, it may have been a step too far. And the lemonade from that lemon might be a willingness either by the American people to discount this abuse even further, or it may ruin the case completely for them even at the jury stage. So we'll see. But there was some good news down in Florida. The judge in Florida just issued a ruling knocking the sham documents case. This is the case where the Biden administration is pretending that the law prevented Trump from taking records with him from the White House, including records that they say are classified or national defense information, which of course he has a right to as president under the Presidential Records Act, relevant court authority, and prior Justice Department and National Archives positions, as demonstrated by Judicial Watch in recounting us being on the wrong end of that debate in the Clinton sock drawer case, where we had thought that there were Clinton records that should have been obtained by the archives after Clinton left office, and the archives told us to jump in a lake. The Justice Department told us that if Clinton had them, they were presumptively personal, and a court said you can't second-guess a president's decision-making in that regard. All of those, all that went out the window when it came to targeting Trump. They just pretended none of that happened. And there were other circumstances. It turned out, I didn't know this at the time in the Clinton sock drawer case, that you know that Reagan also had his diaries, which were also considered to be presidential records because they contain classified information. And they never went after those diaries because of the prerogatives that a president has in that regard. And one of the side notes of, well, I shouldn't say it's a side note, one of the central reasons that Special Counsel Hur said that he didn't think you could get Biden to get convicted, or that it would be not a good move to try to prosecute him, in addition to his increasing dementia, was that he had a plausible defense that he had a right to the records under the law. So for Biden, asserting that right is a reason not to prosecute him, but it's not applied similarly to Trump. What a scam that is, isn't it? So that's the case. They're trying to prosecute him down there. And of course the court, the communist left, the anti-Trump left, whatever you want to call it. They've been using the word communist a lot more recently because I think that's the big threat here at home. Now, are all supporters of the attack on Trump communists? No, but they're certainly following their playbook of abusing power to target political opponents, like communist regimes across the world have done for ages. But the left really hates Judge Cannon down in Florida because A, she's a Trump appointee. She's a female. I think she's Hispanic. So for a left, being a female and an Hispanic, and any minority who is associated with the conservative movement, that you have a target on your back. The left pretends that they, love women and love minorities. No, they only love them if they're politically useful. And you're only politically useful if you agree with them. Otherwise, you'll be targeted based on your race and sex. And in this case, her alleged lack of experience, which is never a problem for their friends when they're appointed to courts or they make decisions. And Cannon has been treating Trump fairly according to the rule of law, more or less. I think she's been too deferential to the government. And this week, she made it official. It's been largely understood this was going to be the case, but she made it official that there's no way on earth she's going to be able to get a trial in, I guess next week. May 20th was the date. And she said that's off the table, and I don't know when we're going to get to a trial at this point, because I've got a dozen major issues to decide within the next few months, some of which could upend the case completely. Like, for instance, the constitutionality of Smith's appointment. I've talked about this before. I talked about it with Mueller. And the question is Smith a constitutional appointment? Meaning, is his work constitutional in light of the fact he didn't have authority under the law to do it because of the nature of his appointment? And the thinking is generally, I think this is the thinking, it's been my thinking, is that you can't have a temporary worker come in and start running grand juries and throwing people in jail as a prosecutor. They got to be they have to work directly for someone who is authorized to do that, which typically would be a Senate-confirmed official, like a U.S. attorney, top officials in the Justice Department, the Attorney General. They're the ones who have that responsibility, and the check related to that responsibility is their Senate appointment process and the fact that the president appointed them and they work directly for the president. And the idea that that Garland can hire someone off the street and then wash his hands and just let him do anything he wants to do is not right. Under that theory, they could hire Michelle Obama and just let her run the Justice Department prosecutions against all of Biden's political enemies because they're conflicted. So that's one of the issues that she has to deal with. The other issues relate to the handling of classified information or the mishandling of classified information. So the trial is off, at least for now. Meaning no date's been scheduled, to be clear. It's not off. And it's unlikely to occur before the election. It's not, well, let's put it this way. It's not going to occur before the election. I mean, this is how evil the Biden operation is. They were telling the judge that the lawyers for Trump, who are now dealing with their allies up in New York, they should be working concurrently during this trial in New York on this case to prepare for trial in 2 weeks or less. The due process rights of Trump, they don't care about. They don't believe he has due process rights. They certainly wouldn't behave this way if they did. But some of the filings now, the Justice Department has confirmed that they were tampering with evidence. Now, did they say we're tampering with evidence? But they described evidence tampering in a brief filed before Cannon the other day. I tweeted something out about it. I think we have the actual brief in our on screen here. Well, I will get to this later because this follows from that, from the description I want to talk about first. So they filed a brief admitting to lying to the court. They didn't call it lying, but I call it lying. As I tweeted out, they just admitted they messed with boxes supposedly containing classified records. Now, you remember all those boxes, right? All those boxes had classified records. Outrage. None of those records were classified under the law. But be that as it may, that's what the government's position was, and they pretended that they were classified or sensitive national security defense information. And this is what they told the court in a footnote after describing that they lost track of where the classified records were in the various boxes. So if they come raid your house and they accuse you of having records you're not supposed to have in your boxes, and they take the boxes away, and they take those records out and lose track of where they were in the boxes, do you think that makes the evidence valid? No. First of all, they were tampering with the evidence as it were anyway. And then they spoiled it. It's called spoliation. That's what Trump lawyers are calling it, spoliation. I mean, any charges related to that might be suspect now. And this is the footnote they had to explain it. The government acknowledges that this is inconsistent. I just described what they had screwed up, messing with the documents, that this is inconsistent with what the government counsel previously understood and represented to the court. Oh, this is what we previously understood, so don't blame us, Judge. We're just lawyers. Government responding to the court's question, this is the transcript, of whether the boxes were in their original intact form as seized, by stating they are, with one exception, and that is the classified records have been removed and placeholders have been put in the documents. And here's the admission of the FBI completely screwing up that process. After the boxes were brought to Washington field office of the FBI created an index to correlate the documents with classification markings to codes, e.g. document BB, and labeling the classified cover sheets in the boxes with the codes for the seized documents. The FBI also generally replaced the handwritten sheets with classified cover sheets annotated with the index code, but regardless, any handwritten sheets that currently remain in the boxes do not represent additional classified documents. They were just not removed when the classified cover sheets with the index code were added. In many, this is the kicker, in many but not all instances, the FBI was able to determine which document with classification markings corresponded to a particular placeholder sheet. So the mirror image of that is that there were records that they were not able to link to where they were in the boxes. Evidence spoiled, illegitimate, scheme, fraud, scam. And is this the mishandling of classified information that they're trying to prosecute Trump for? Should the FBI be prosecuted? Should the Justice Department, who oversaw this, be prosecuted? Should there be a criminal investigation? And this further explains how it is that we already known this issue, that the that infamous photo was staged. So that photo was released by the government as part of a propaganda effort to destroy President Trump. The Biden administration wants to jail their opponents. So what do? They come up with photos. And the photo is obviously staged. The documents were not found in that state, but it's even worse than that, as this admission discloses and confirms. As I noted back in 2022, 2 years ago, it was a dishonest photo, and it was submitted in the court to the court. This wasn't something they just released. They were trying to mislead a court here. Those agencies are irredeemably corrupted, I can tell you. Well, let's go back to that photo. So I want you to look at that photo. They would have you believe, to make Trump look more guilty, that when you see secret there at the bottom or top secret there in the right, in the upper right, that's what was in the boxes. And that Trump and anyone around him obviously should have known. You're going through documents. Oh, look at the yellow and red index sheets. They put those there as placeholders. That isn't what the original document looked like. Man, if I were Judge Cannon, I'd have a big old hearing on that scam. A show cause order in some way to make it clear and demand accountability for who was trying to mislead the court here. There's your FBI, folks, fully funded. I don't trust a darn thing they do. I don't trust a darn thing this Justice Department does, even if they do things I think is probably right in terms of administering and applying the law, certainly on political issues. I know there's a presumption of evidence for people who have been indicted. I think it should be even more than that. You should just presume improper conduct by the Justice Department and FBI, especially on politically sensitive cases. Like this congressman, Democratic congressman down in Texas was indicted a few weeks ago, I guess it was the week before last. Cuellar, right? He and his wife. Democrat, anti-Biden and on border issues, but generally reliable Democrat, but not very good on border issues, which is key to the presidency of Joe Biden. And he was indicted. And for all I know, he did everything they're alleging he did. But for all I know, because it came from the Justice Department, they could be making up crap against this guy. And we should just presume everything they do is compromised. Everything. Until there's significant reform. I mean, in the case of the FBI and Justice Department, I don't know how they survive in their current form if you're trying to get them back to the good graces of constitutional government. Meanwhile, the rioting continues. Here in the District of Columbia, where I went to school at George Washington University, they had the communists taken over there, and GW asked the police to come in, and the mayor of D.C., the Democrat, said no. And they only cleaned up I think they only moved in the day before, or the day of their testimony before the House, because the House got, some members of House, both Democrats and Republicans are like, what do you mean? You're not enforcing the law? And so they went in and they arrested these folks, and I noted this morning in the Washington Post that all of them have been released. They weren't even processed normally. Compare and contrast how they treated those communist terrorist supporters with how they're treating the January 6th defendants. Despicable. Well, that's enough about current events. I mean, I'll never get through this update if I focus on everything that's outraging me this week, right? I mean, so just so you know, you're not alone. I'm as outraged about everything you're seeing as you are. But you're also not alone because Judicial Watch actually tries to address the issues directly and not just yells about it, but goes to court and fights the corruption, tries to expose it, and by exposing it, hopefully stopping it, educating Americans about what their government's up to, and protecting your rights in the process. And one issue I know many of you are concerned about, a lot of Americans are concerned about it, even though the left media pretends we shouldn't be concerned about, which is we shouldn't be concerned about it. I know many of you are concerned about election integrity. And it's been a high priority for Judicial Watch for years. And specifically, in addition to all the other battles related to election integrity, we've taken a leadership role, and we are the nation's leader in cleaning up the election rolls as federal law requires. If the left had their way, you could die and move away and be a potential voter on a roll in a state forever and a day. I mean, we found time and time again in states across the nation that they're not cleaning up the rolls as federal law requires. And federal law requires that states take reasonable steps to clean up the voter rolls. Does it have to be perfect? Of course not. And the reasonable steps are, the law is, thanks as confirmed by Judicial Watch, we solidified this approach through our litigation. The law is, if you don't show up and vote in a federal election one year, the state or locality is supposed to send you a card. Let's say I don't vote. Hey, I'm supposed to get a card in the mail. Hey, Tom Fitton, you didn't vote. Are you still there? Let us know. That's all you need to do. Let us know. And if I don't respond to that card or otherwise vote in the next 2 federal elections, they are supposed to remove my name. Because what's the danger of having an ineligible name on the rolls of someone who died or moved away? It's a potential pool of voters that fraudsters can use. And just having dirty voting rolls generally undermines confidence in the elections. That's why federal law requires it. And until Judicial Watch came along 12 years ago now and started enforcing the law, suing in court to get states to clean up the rolls, successfully so, dramatically so, the law has been virtually ignored because the Justice Department, which is run by the left under both Republican and Democrat administrations, they don't want to enforce that law because the left relies on ensuring their policies and narratives all suggest to me they want to be able to steal elections when necessary, and that means having dirty voting rolls, that means having no voter ID, that means virtually having no checks in place for elections, election security, to keep citizens only voting, for instance, and stop non-citizens from voting. So Judicial Watch just filed a major lawsuit in California on behalf of itself. And, you know, if you're a Judicial Watch supporter, this is for you. And the Libertarian Party, California, to clean up the voter rolls in California. They're a mess. We filed it in the U.S. District of California. It's a massive, new, important lawsuit. As I described earlier to you, summarized, the National Voter Registration Act requires states to conduct general programs that make a reasonable effort to remove from the official voter rolls the names of ineligible voters who have died or changed residence. The law requires registrations to be canceled when voters fail to respond to address confirmation notices and then fail to vote in the next two general federal elections. Now, in 2016, as I noted earlier, the Supreme Court ratified this approach in a key case. The left didn't like the fact that Judicial Watch had caused this activity to take place in Indiana and Ohio. Specifically, I think it was Indiana. Was it? Who said it? Indiana or Ohio? I don't remember now. Well, either way, the Supreme Court said Judicial Watch's negotiated settlement that required that. That's right. I mean, that's what the law is. And ironically, back in 2023, just about a year or so ago, we had settled the case of years before that, but part of that settlement was a lawsuit against California again, prior to that, and Los Angeles County, and we settled. And Los Angeles County removed, as a result of that settlement, 1.2 million names. 4 million names have been removed nationally just in the last year or two, thanks to Judicial Watch litigation in places like California. I mean, I talked about this in summary fashion on a video about this earlier. Let's go look at that.
Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here. We have a new lawsuit in California to clean up the rolls there. It looks like, according to the numbers we've obtained from California, and they're reporting to the federal government, that there are 1 to 2 million names plus who should not be on the rolls, but who are on the rolls. These are people who died or moved away. Now, we previously sued Los Angeles County in California and settled. Los Angeles County, in response, removed 1.2 million names from the rolls. But as you can see from this latest lawsuit, as federal law requires, there needs to be a lot more cleaning up in California. We already have a lawsuit in Illinois to clean up the rolls there. And over the last year or two, we've caused the removal of 4 million names from across the country in places like, as I said, California, New York City, Washington, D.C., and up in Pennsylvania. But there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, as I say, California is still a mess. It's chaos there when it comes to their voting rolls. And specifically, here's the copy of the lawsuit. This is what the lawsuit looks like. You can go online and read it. Go to our press release. There'll be a link to I think our press release will be linked below, and then you can click on the release, and then we'll have the video. Then we'll have the link to the lawsuit there. And as we warned them early on, because we have to send them a warning, say, what's going on here? And sometimes the warning works. We get responses back from counties or states saying, thanks for letting us know. We removed a bunch of names, or don't worry, we're on it, or the numbers were wrong, etc. And we don't sue. But in this case, California really didn't have a good response. I mean, our initial analysis showed that 12 counties inactive registrations constituted more than 20% of all registrations. So in many counties in California, a fifth of the list, one of every 5 names, shouldn't have been there. They were dirty. One county had 27, over 1 out of 4 names. Now, what's the national average in terms of dirty names on the rolls? May still be too high as far as I'm concerned. It's 11%. So nearly twice the national average. And here are the specifics. So, the litigation comes only after a lot of letters, right, back and forth. Because believe it or not, if we can get the good result of getting the names cleaned up short of a lawsuit, that's fine. The threat of a lawsuit, getting the results of actually suing, oh, that's nearly perfect. So we do a lot of work to try to get our goals accomplished short of litigation. And California, as part of this work, it kind of admitted to us that they were not doing what they needed to do, and nothing short of litigation was going to accomplish our goals. Listen to this detail. California, in their response to our litigation letters, admitted that 21 California counties removed five or fewer registrations pursuant to Section 8D1B. That's the National Voter Registration Act reference. Basically failing to respond to a confirmation notice and then failing to vote in 2 federal elections. So that process resulted in no counties removing nobody. In the measuring period, let's go back. From November 2020 to November 2022. Okay, now I'm going to read it here. 16 of the 21 counties removed 0 such registrations during this period. For 2 years, you had 21 counties in California remove no dirty names from the list as they're supposed to under federal law. And these are the counties. It's listed there. If you're a California resident, you may live there. Chances are you might live there, given the odds. The population. Alameda Alameda gets a brownie point. They had 1 name they removed. Alpine, Calaveras, Imperial, Lake, Modoc. How do you pronounce Modoc? Never heard that county. Placer, Plumas, San Benito, San Bernardino. So some big counties. I'm assuming some of these counties I'm not aware of are rural and have not large numbers, but others like San Bernardino, that's a big county. San Luis, San Mateo, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, Shasta, etc. Stanislaus, Ventura, Yolo. Those counties contain 22% of California's population. Oh, 22%. 5.9 million names in those counties, and they haven't cleaned up the names at all. And as we say in the next paragraph there in the complaint, the lawsuit as a point of comparison, San Diego County with a smaller total, they have a big number, 2.3, almost 2.4 million names, voter registrations. They removed 130,000 registrations. So those counties probably should have removed what? I'd say about 500,000 at least. That's probably being generous. And then we go on. It gets better or worse, depending on your point of view. A bunch of counties don't even know how many names they removed. They admit in paragraph 60 here, 16 California counties could not at the time of the EAC survey. That's the Election Assistance Commission survey. So this isn't like numbers we're like, we are just drawing out of a hat. These are numbers they're telling us about or telling the federal government about. The Election Assistance Commission is an arm of the federal government, and there was reporting about their compliance with the law they're supposed to provide to the federal government. So we look at that reporting to figure out whether they're complying with the law. You would think the Justice Department does that too, but Judicial Watch is the Justice Department when it comes to enforcing cleaning up election rolls. We are doing the heavy lifting. The Justice Department, which is run by the radical left, wants the rolls to be dirty. That's my conclusion. And so we come in and we do the work that they should be doing. I mean, we're happy to do the work, but it is outrageous that we do it with zero assistance from the Justice Department. Completely outrageous. So getting back to the complaint, 16 California counties could not tell how many registrations were removed pursuant to the law in the last 2 years, November 2020 to November 2022. I guess that's not the last 2 years, but that was the last reporting period. The 16 counties are Del Norte, El Dorado, Inyo, Kern, Lassen, Marin, Mendocino, Merced, Mono, Nevada, Orange, Riverside, San Joaquin, Santa Clara, Sonoma, and Tulare. So that's another 28% of the population. So we're talking about half of California, counties comprising half of California's population, basically either haven't removed names or don't know how many names they removed. And you can be sure if they knew, they'd tell us. Because if the number's not there, that means they're, in our view, they're not doing their job. I mean, how is it reasonable? You know, you're supposed to take a reasonable effort to clean up the rolls. I mean, how is it you show that you're doing something reasonably if you don't even know what the numbers are? I mean, you just presume the worst. I mean, a few of the counties started doing something after we made noise, but, you know, that kind of highlights the issue too, doesn't it? I mean, you just can't wait for someone to catch you before you do something. That's not running a reasonable program. And there's no reason to believe they're going to start doing things honestly from here on in. So there's a lot of other great detail in the lawsuit, and I encourage you to read it. But as I said, we've got this new big case in California, and it could result, or it should result, in upwards of 2 million names, at least 1 million, maybe as high as 2.5 million. So let's stick with 2 million. 1 million plus names at least, maybe as many as 2.5 million. Who knows? Being removed from the rolls if this case either goes the way we hope it will go. Now, when that happens, it may be a few years before all of that happens. It may be immediate that some of that happens. Either way, I'm quite confident, based on Judicial Watch's demonstrated record of success, that we will have cleaner elections in California thanks to this lawsuit. Heck, our prior lawsuit led to the removal of 1.2 million names, the settlement of that lawsuit. And these numbers are much bigger. So I don't know about you, but I think Judicial Watch deserves wide support for doing this work that the Justice Department refuses to do and would never be done. And if you like this type of work, I encourage you to support Judicial Watch by going to judicialwatch.org. We've got the case in Illinois to clean up the rolls. We have a case in Illinois to ensure that they're not counting ballots for 2 weeks after Election Day. We have a similar case in Mississippi where they're counting ballots after Election Day. And more is coming. More is coming. But dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections. And, you know, on the election security measure issue, there was a big debate this week in the House. The House tried to pass, or successfully passed, with no Democrat support, a bill that would have required the following. Let's go to that bill. Equal Representation Act. The bill requires any questionnaire used in the decennial census to include a checkbox or other similar option for respondents to indicate whether the respondent and each household member is a U.S. citizen. Can you believe they don't want to track that? Of course you can believe it, because the left doesn't want you to know how many foreign nationals are in the United States to any certain extent, clear extent. The Department of Commerce, which runs the census, must make public the number of citizens and non-citizens in each state. They don't want you to know about the invasion that's happening in plain sight. Of course they oppose that and don't want that to happen. The bill also requires that the statement sent by the President to Congress indicating the number of persons in each state related to the reapportionment of U.S. representatives excludes non-citizens. That's what the left really opposes. You know, first of all, we have the issue of non-citizens voting, okay? Or the potential of non-citizens voting, both legal and illegal citizens who are not supposed to be voting in federal elections. There's no real check in place to stop them from voting. Now, the law technically, not explicitly, prevents them from voting in the sense that it's illegal, but there's no check. Meaning that when a state takes a registration form and someone says, I'm a citizen, they just have to take their word for it. It's the honor system. Obviously, that's a fraud waiting to happen. So that's one danger to our democracy with the presence of tens of millions of foreign nationals here in the United States. Of course, they're going to be voting in elections. Of course they are. And the other danger, which is more indirect but is significant, and probably more significant, is that the presence of foreign nationals, legal and otherwise, and illegal aliens, for instance, 10 million people, they're counted for purposes of the census under current law. And what does that mean? It means that when the census is taken and the numbers are put out there, a state that has a bunch of non-citizens, they get the benefit of the presence of those non-citizens with greater representation in Congress and more electoral votes in the Electoral College during the presidential elections. So places like California, who are seemingly hemorrhaging citizens who are tired of the socialist politics there, you wonder, why is it they keep on doing it? Because they don't care. They don't need citizens to keep on doing it, because they're replaced with non-citizens and they maintain Congress, power in Congress and their seats in Congress by replacing citizens with non-citizens. Their presence gives them increased power and effectively leads to members of Congress unequal representation in Congress at the House level, because you will have a member of Congress who represents, for instance, a district with many non-citizens and less U.S. citizens. So they're representing less voters but have equal power with a congressman who represents virtually only citizens in Congress. Your vote is diluted. Your power and representation is diluted by the presence of non-citizens for purpose being used for purposes of apportionment in Congress. Isn't that quite the racket? So the 10 million people who are here now, unless they're removed or the law is changed that doesn't allow them to be counted, the 10 million that Biden is importing through his illegal, unprecedented attack on America through this invasion, the next census comes around, the states where those people live are going to get more political power in Congress, necessarily. Either they will retain power they otherwise wouldn't have had if citizens weren't there, or have more power that they otherwise would not have had because non-citizens are there. Does that sound right to you? It doesn't to me. And Trump tried to change that. He was interfered with by the Supreme Court. And here Congress is trying to change it. I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad the vote was taken. But let me give you a little bit of a different. They were complaining that Democrats didn't vote for it. Well, why would they? They didn't need to. Why wasn't this attached to the must-pass spending legislation earlier this year? If it's so important, why wasn't it part of, you want the government operating, then you don't count non-citizens in apportioning power. You don't use non-citizens to take political power away from American citizens. We're going to shut the government down over that. No, they didn't do that. So here we have a bill that was passed by a party line vote in Congress. It's going to go nowhere in the Senate. So is it good that the discussion's happening? Yes. But I'm frustrated that, Republicans are going to take credit for talking about something at the exact time when it's least likely to accomplish anything. So that's my take on that. Getting back to Trump. I don't know where we'd be without Judicial Watch and kind of getting a full understanding of the unprecedented targeting of Trump, the targeting of our elections, the election rigging. It's happening right now. Our election's already compromised. Trump's already been messed with. You've already been messed with. You've been denied access to your candidate if you're a Trump supporter. Even if you're not a Trump supporter, you've been denied access to the candidate you don't like so that you can debate him through your own candidate. They're messing, the judges and the Democratic prosecutors are placing their thumbs on the scale. Some judges aren't being railroaded into doing so, like Judge Cannon. Others, like Judge Merchan, are happy to engage in this political interference, even if it means upending the rule of law to do so. And then you got prosecutors like Fani Willis, who not only are engaging these political indictments, pursuing these political indictments against Trump and others for daring to challenge the election, but have their personal corruption associated with it as well. And the good news there is an upper court or an appellate court in Georgia is going to reconsider the lower court's ruling to let her stay on the case despite that crazy situation she had with Nathan Wade, where the whole prosecution has been tainted by their relationship. I mean, he had a job in part because of their relationship, and that job was prosecuting Trump. The whole thing should be thrown out in my view. But on top of that, we've got these issues about collusion with the Biden administration and the Pelosi Congress to get Trump by Fani Willis. And Judicial Watch had been asking for documents there. And they told us they didn't have anything. Fani Willis told us she didn't have anything. But point in fact is Congress said they had something. So we sued because the documents showed that the Fani Willis's people were in contact with Congress, the Pelosi Congress. And those documents would have been responsive to our lawsuit or our FOIA request, our open records request in Georgia. So we sued, and typically I shouldn't say typically, all the time when we sue, the government or the government official, in this case Fani Willis, they show up in court and respond to the lawsuit. Guess what? She hasn't shown up in court in Fulton County. Hasn't responded to our lawsuit. She's in default. She failed to answer our lawsuit. Now, I've been at Judicial Watch for 26 years. Judicial Watch has been around for 30 years. I'm not aware ever in Judicial Watch's history of filing hundreds of open records and FOIA lawsuits that a federal agency, a state agency, or a government official has never failed. I'm not aware of that ever happening, of a government official or agency ever not showing up in court. It just has never happened before. Now, they argue with us about whether they owe us documents. That's a different matter, and they litigate the issue. But to ignore the requirement that you show up and answer a lawsuit in court, it's never happened before. And it shows to me that Fani Willis is really desperate to hide something. Incredible. She's in default, and we filed a motion in court seeking to obtain and confirm that default judgment. This is the quote: "Defendant has not filed an answer, and no answer has been served upon Judicial Watch. Defendant's answer was due 30 days after service on or about April 10th, 2024. Pursuant to Georgia law, the case automatically became in default when the answer was not filed by the due date." And it's because they always get extra time, right? So you would not get extra time typically, but the government always gets extra time. So even with that extra time, further, pursuant to the code section, defendant was permitted as a matter of right to open the default within 15 days of default or by April 25th. And she still didn't show up. And this is what we sued for. In our lawsuit, Judicial Watch states that Willis's representation about not having records responsive to the request is likely false. There was a letter from the Jim Jordan showing that Willis requested assistance directly from the Pelosi committee, the January 6th committee. In fact, there were news reports showing they met with the committee. We were seeking records of communications Willis had with Jack Smith in the House Pelosi operation. So what's going to happen next? The court is going to, I believe, quickly enter a default judgment, and I think we'll be able to get fees. The interesting thing about Georgia law, unlike federal law, is that it can be a crime directly to not follow FOIA. And I tweeted something out in this regard. Let me get up close to that. I tell you, the left hates it when I tweet out stuff like this because it's factual and it raises uncomfortable questions for them. So what do? They attack the fact that, quote, I'm not a lawyer, and then they attack about what I look like. It's very sophisticated, their response. It can be a crime under Georgia law to violate the open records law. And I cite the law. Any person or entity knowingly and willfully violating the provisions of this article by failing or refusing to provide access to records not subject to exemption from this article, by knowingly and willingly failing or refusing to provide access to such records within the time limit set forth in this article, or by knowingly and willingly frustrating or attempting to obtain or attempting to frustrate the access to records by intentionally making records difficult to obtain or review, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor and upon conviction shall be punished by a fine not to exceed $1,000 for the first violation. Or they can be subject to a civil penalty. And it goes on. So, is this a crime? I don't know if it's a crime or not. Looks, smells like a crime to me. Maybe we'll have a better idea depending on how the court rules or what Fani Willis does in response. But this is a potential crime Fani Willis engaged in to cover up her communications with Jack Smith and the Pelosi Congress. The collusion. So I'll keep you updated on that. That's what I love about Judicial Watch, the fact that we're like doing this basic work that no one else does, that Congress isn't doing effectively or well, if at all. The media has zero interest in doing. And without Judicial Watch's leadership here, these folks would be free and clear of any accountability. I've got my coffee and my Diet Dr. Pepper all at once here. Excuse me. So to close it out, at least in this part of the discussion, speaking of collusion, we're talking now about the raid on Trump's home. And we're supposed to forget that outrage, and it is outrage. Hunter Biden's home was never raided. Joe Biden's home was never raided. But Trump's home gets raided based on a pretext and a setup. And so we've been second to none and highlighting that abuse, going to court to demand answers about that abuse. I mean, we're not just complaining about it, we're suing for the details of the abuse. And the big question has been well, how do they work with the Secret Service here? I mean, is the Secret Service corrupted by this anti-Trump animus? I would submit yes at the senior levels. The Secret Service is a disaster. I mean, there are great guys and gals there to do significant work. They put their lives on the line. But the politicized, incompetent leadership at the Secret Service makes their job so much harder. Exhibit 1 is the crazy dog by Joe Biden's dogs who were attacking agents and White House officials by the dozens, and the Secret Service didn't do anything about it other than tell their people to keep quiet about it. They don't have their back. So I think it's curious to know how this all worked out. And in terms of the raid, how did the Secret Service and FBI coordinate the violation of President Trump's home? And it is a violation. There was no lawful basis for it. Anyone who pretends otherwise, just because it had the patina of a subpoena around it, doesn't mean it made in good faith. To me, it was it was a criminal act as far as I'm concerned, that should be subject to an investigation as soon as someone honest takes over the reins of the Justice Department or the presidency. And so we sued for records about the raid because they were giving us a stonewall. So the Justice Department was violating the law about records. Okay? The Justice Department is prosecuting Trump over records, violating the law about records transparency or demanding records transparency. And we filed this lawsuit, I think it was 2 years ago. This is kind of an older lawsuit. Yeah, it was October 2022. We sued the Department of Homeland Security. Excuse me, it wasn't the Justice Department. Although the Justice Department is actually, they represent the agency, so they're responsible. For all communications of the U.S. Secret Service internally and with the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding the raid on Trump's home, including any video or audio recordings made during the raid. And so finally, after stonewalling and in response to this lawsuit, they gave us an audio of a voicemail message left by an FBI agent to a Secret Service agent, I think 2 or 3 days after the raid. Let's go to the audio.
Yes, hi. This is a special agent with the FBI. We met on Monday. We have a couple of specific follow-up asks of you. So give me a call so we can discuss that. That's my number. And my name is. Thanks. Bye.
have a couple of specific follow-up asks of you. So the collusion just didn't begin and end on Monday. It continued afterwards. What were those asks? I have a question about, and I'm sure you do too. But isn't it interesting? It's just one voicemail. We got it. I thought it was important we released it. Let people know what's going on. As I describe in our press release, the recording is real-time evidence of the Biden administration's whole of government operation to abuse Trump by raiding his home. Judicial Watch will continue to piece together the details of the conspiracy to launch an unprecedented and malicious raid on the home of former President Donald J. Trump. And we have lawsuit after lawsuit over this abuse of Trump. And I tell you, even if Trump takes office, we're still going to be demanding answers for what happened to him. Because this is about government abuse of power. And I encourage you to go to our press release here and look at all the lawsuits we have. I'm always impressed by Judicial Watch's work. Not because I'm the president, but because I'm a citizen. My eyes are still bothering me. That's why I'm rubbing them like they are, like I am. I mean, just think about this discussion we've had. We've got lawsuits in Illinois and California to clean up the rolls. We have a FOIA lawsuit in Fulton County, Georgia, to get records about the targeting of Trump. We have this lawsuit up against the Department of Homeland Security, exposing Secret Service, FBI collaboration against Trump. I've talked about last week, we're in court with the Biden gang trying to get the audios of the tapes he made with the special counsel, the interviews. They don't want the audios to be released because of Biden's privacy. We're suing for the names of the Jack Smith gang targeting Trump. They want those names kept away from us, senior people. Lawsuit after lawsuit. And I'll say it once and I'll say it again. If you're not supporting Judicial Watch, you should. You can go to our website at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatchoneword.org, and support our work. And if you're already supporting our work, I thank you, and I encourage you to consider supporting our work again. Now, before I go, I promised you beforehand I was going to answer a few questions. I have a few questions here that have been gathered from you, dear viewers, dear listeners, dear supporters. Let's go through. So Paul asked, why have they not impeached Biden yet? Because the House Republican leadership doesn't think they have the votes for impeachment, so they are unwilling to provide the leadership to gain those votes for impeachment, and they plan to let it die in the vine. That's why. A political decision by House Republican leadership. That's why it hasn't been done yet. Have you heard Mike Johnson talk about impeaching Biden? I haven't. Heck, look at what Biden just did the other day. Or it's reported this week, he's curtailed aid to Israel, arms to Israel in the middle of a terror war because he's afraid of his communist supporters here in the United States not voting for him. So he wants to help the Hamas now in its terror war on Israel by preventing Israel from getting access to weapons necessary to defeat Hamas. Remember, they impeached Trump for asking questions about aid going to Ukraine. And here Biden explicitly, for political reasons, stopped aid going to Israel in a time of war. Will he get impeached? I think, the fact that I have to ask the question like that suggests what the answer is. So I don't have a good answer there. This question is from catch, I think. C-A-T-C-H. What are your predictions of the chance that President Trump will be found not guilty in his trials he is undergoing, or will the charges get dropped? So I'm assuming you're thinking of the trial up in New York. I think the chances are, I would have said before the trial began 0. I think they're greater than 0, but still insignificant. I think the more likely outcome at this point is that he will be found partly guilty, meaning he'll be exonerated on some charges and maybe found guilty of others, or it will be a hung jury and the trial will have to be, end. It will end in a hung jury. And whether that ends the prosecution entirely, I don't know. So that's what my prediction is. But I don't know. I'm just a little old Judicial Watch down here in Washington, D.C., reading the same accounts you're reading, trying to read the same tea leaves. I don't have any special insight other than based on my experience and instinct with these political trials. This is from No Treason 1867. Hi, Tom. Do you think enough headway has been made in the election laws to prevent another 2020? Thanks for all you do. No, I don't. I think there have been some changes, but in my view, as long as you allow the mass mailing in of ballots unsecured, impossible nearly to check for fraud, I think it raises significant issues about the credibility of any election. Things might be better in 2024 than they were in 2020 in terms of oversight, but I don't think enough has been done to ensure that our elections can't be upended and ruined as a result of poor ballot administration or behavior that undermines confidence in the outcome. Judicial Watch is doing its part to try to clean up the rolls and other things like that. But, in most states, or many states, like California, Illinois, I think Pennsylvania too, there's no voter ID. I noticed the media is like demanding Republicans commit to supporting the outcome of the election. Well, what does that mean? What is the outcome of the election going to be? You can't question an outcome if you think it's compromised? Is that the rule now? I mean, they're already planning for an election that's compromised and telling us to accept it. And going back to where we are now, the election already is compromised by their interference through the improper targeting of Trump. How do you fix that? No election law change is going to fix that. So thanks for your question. I'm not getting angry at you. I'm just getting angry at the situation. Well, thank you for joining us. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to my Kelly, the mother of my kids, my late mother, Margaret. And I'm sure there are mothers in your lives who deserve your thanks. And if you are a mother watching, happy Mother's Day. And I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.